I was looking up some stuff online about this whole thing we're going to be talking about today, and I discovered that the oldest known star in the whole universe, at least from the perspective of what can be seen from planet Earth, is a star just around the corner, only 190 light years away. If you know anything about astronomy, that's not far away. Its number is HD 140283, but I love the name that they gave it, the Methuselah star. If you know the name Methuselah from your early chapters of Genesis, Methuselah is the guy who is credited with living the longest. And astronomers tell us that this star is the oldest star that they've ever found in the universe. It goes back in terms of its age to very, very shortly after the universe came to be. Which means that that star helps us know what time it is. In terms of the great grand story of God's creation, it is one of those markers that says, well, this is what God was doing at this particular point in time. It turns out that people have been looking to the sun and the moon and the stars to figure out the time for all of recorded history. The pharaohs built very elaborate temples, and in this particular case, the room you're looking at is way inside a mountain. And in front of it are chambers and tunnels and passageways all lined up so that the sun will shine in there only 2 times a year. On 2 given days, which would have corresponded to, I think, the Pharaoh's birthday or some other very holy day, and only on those 2 days, the sun would be in just such a position that it would shine all the way in and light up those Pharaoh figures way down inside the mountain. Now, you might say, well, that's nice. Well, it's more than nice if you were an Egyptian and didn't have all the fancy clocks that we have. I mean, you can basically know what time it is without ever opening your windows. You could live in the bottom of a tunnel and be able to follow everything by just getting online. Back in those days, they didn't have clocks. They didn't have all the calendars that we have and all the various ways of telling time. They had to see what the sun was doing. And so how did they know what day was the Pharaoh's birthday? Well, it's the day that the light shines all the way into the back of the tunnel. Stonehenge, something that many of us are familiar, probably all of us are familiar with, was built in such a way that you could tell when the longest day of the year was happening and when the shortest day of the year was happening. Again, among the many other theories of what Stonehenge was for, one thing seems pretty certain. It served as a great big clock, a clock for the whole year. And the Chinese, it turns out, have been keeping track of the stars for over 3,500 years, observing every little thing that happened and then figuring out what time it is based upon that. Now, we now measure the heavens in terms of time as well. We use the phrase light years to say how far things are from each other. It gets just too cumbersome to try to assign miles to a universe that stretches for billions of light years. We're no longer dependent on the sun's shadow, to tell us the time of day. I doubt many of us have sundials in our backyard. And what good would they be in Vermont half of the time anyway? I have a cloud dial in my backyard. But the lights in the heavens are still our oldest clocks. And they help teach us to number our days, as David says. Now, the sun, the moon, and the stars, because they could be used to tell time, held the supreme place in the ancient world. In the ancient world, people divided the universe into 2 pieces, the heavens, the earth. Guess which one was more powerful? Guess which one was more important? Well, the heavens, of course. From the heavens came the rain that watered your crops. From the heavens came the sun that lit up the world and made things grow. From the heavens, you would see the stars, the moon, the sun, and that's how you told time. That's how you knew what was going on down here. Now, to the ancient people, the heavens were where the gods were. And in fact, and here we have to stretch our brains, and I'm taking just a second to try to, pull ourselves away from the way we see the world. When ancient people saw the sun, they saw a god. They did not see a fiery ball in the sky. They didn't have the astronomical or scientific understanding we have. They thought the sun was the supreme god. The Egyptians were all over that. And you'll often see, if you go on online with any Egyptian art, you'll see a round disc with wings, and that was the sun god. The Babylonians worshipped, first and foremost, the moon. Because the moon also, it changed. It's full moon one day, and then it's a little smaller and smaller and smaller, and so on. And sometimes the moon would go in front of the sun, and this all meant the gods were working something out, and they were sending a message. Hello, Earth, look, stuff's happening up here. And the same was true with the stars. All sorts of things could happen with the stars. Actually, the zodiac could tell you what month of the year you were in, because you would just look to see when a particular group of stars would rise, and when they were in a certain place, that means it's a certain time. Now, if the sun, the moon, and the stars are actually the gods talking to us, and that's how they saw it, then the sun, the moon, and the stars are worthy of worship. And that's what ancient people did. They worshiped the sun, they worshiped the moon, they worshiped the stars. They said time itself is sacred. Now, we look at time as important. And we measure, I've got a big clock back there right over your heads. As important as all of you are, I look at the clock more than look at you, because I want to be thoughtful to you in terms of when we get done. But that's just a matter of how we organize ourselves. To ancient peoples, time was life and death. Time was a gift from the gods. The stars, the sun, the moon were the gods that talked to people, or at least hinted to people what was going on by where they happened to be. We can read, for instance, about a king of Judah who should have been worshiping God, but he got off track. One of the evil kings, his name was Manasseh. And we read this in 2 Chronicles 33:3. And he goes right into the temple that belongs to God, to Yahweh, the temple that Solomon built. And he rearranges the furniture and sets it up for pagan worship. Listen to what it says. He rebuilt the high places, places of worship, his father Hezekiah had demolished. He also erected altars to the Baals and made Asherah poles. Those were other pagan gods. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshiped them. Now, what Manasseh was doing was he wasn't simply rebelling against his dad, although he was. What he was really doing was he was going along with the culture of his time, which said the ultimate reality that you're ever going to experience is in the sun, the moon, and the stars. They tell you what's going on. Observe them, study them, learn from them, and you can figure out how to do your life. Time itself was sacred. Anything that told the time was worthy of worship. But for those of us who have come to know the true God, there's another path. One that is far different from this path of doing your life, trying to pick up clues from the universe around you as to how you can get by. It's a path not to the stars and whatever message they may or may not offer, but it's the path to the one who made the stars. The Bible's creation story reveals to us not some mysterious messages from planets and stars, but it reveals to us the Creator who spoke them into existence and gave them to us as a gift to help us organize our world. I'm going to take a few minutes to read to you from Genesis chapter 1. You remember, the first thing God created in the creation story was light. Day 1, he created light. In day 4, we're told what he did with the light, how the light worked in human experience. And we read in verses 14 to 19, and God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the 4th day. Now, to an ancient people, these were revolutionary words. Because instead of this creation story saying that the sun and the moon and the stars are the gods that run your life and run the world. This scripture is saying they're just part of what God created so that we could be blessed in his creation. Huge difference here, whether you worship the creation or whether you worship the Creator. One group would say, hey, we're in this world, we're basically on our own, we've got to figure stuff out. We've got all these fancy lights up there. They seem to be following some sort of purpose. They must have some message. We got to figure it out, make our life work. The other says, these are God's creation. It was the Creator God who gave us this gift of telling time and of knowing our place in his world. His sun and his stars carry a silent message that points back to him. One of my favorite Psalms is Psalm 19. And again, I want to read to you here from the first 4 verses, because listen to what David is saying about the sun, the moon, and the stars. He says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Yes, he says, the sun, the moon, and the stars have a message. But it's not the message of how you should organize your day. They don't have some secret code that you're going to decipher. They talk about the God who made them. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. In other words, the skies talk to us. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the end of the world. What he's saying is, you can learn about our world by studying our world. Whether it's the sky, or whether you're studying trees or plants, or whether you're studying animals or microbiology, the world talks to us. But David says it all has the same message. Glory to the God who created us. Now, that shows us that there are 2 ways we can approach our world, 2 paths. One is a clothed system in which we grope about in the dark, hoping to decipher meaning from the world around us. And the other leads us to the glorious freedom of living in the light of the God who created us. Every one of us chooses these 2 paths, between these 2 paths. I get a kick out of these commercials for the lottery. Is there anything more random than the lottery? I mean, what are the odds? They say basically, get all wet and hold your finger up in the air, and you're more likely to hit by lightning than to win the lottery. So they got to talk you into winning the lottery. So how do they do that? Well, remember those commercials where the guy gets the phone number from the girl? He's like all excited. And so he goes and he calls the number and he gets a pizza place. So then the moral of the story is, well, take that number and go use it on a lottery ticket. Really? Really? You're going to run your life around somebody gave you a bum number for a pizza place, and then that was a sign from the universe that you're to go buy a lottery ticket? That's a closed system. That's a nutty system. That's the world we live in. Go get your paper. Go way back with on the funny page, right where it belongs, are your horoscopes. Because those are just basically word comics. And somebody writes up this drivel, and, if your birthday was on such and such a day, well, the universe is suggesting that this wouldn't be a good day for you to go to the dentist or something. I mean, really? Really? But that's what we're left with if we, in our own strength and in our own mind, try to figure out the world that we live in. And we look at things that seem more powerful than ourselves, and we go, I wonder if that's a hint from upstairs. And I'm sure we've all fallen into this trap. You may know people that, if such and such a thing happens, they won't do this on that day and that. You know what I mean? How many hotels don't have a 13 on the elevator dial? You ever notice that? Oh, I don't want to be on the 13th floor. Why not? Did you realize that the floor after 12 is the 13th, even if it says 14? Hello? And yet, somehow, you just don't know. I just got to be sure. That means we're trying to extract meaning from a world that's trying to tell us something else. Well, what's the world trying to tell us? It's trying to tell us that it was made by God. That's what it's trying to do. Paul very, very clearly says this in Romans chapter 1, where he says, nobody has an excuse. The world is without excuse when it comes to this issue of knowing God. And we go, what do you mean, Paul? Because the world is screaming that God exists. It doesn't tell you all the particulars about him. It doesn't offer you in and of itself a deep relationship. He does that through Jesus. But you can't go out there and look at the world and not know that somebody created this beautiful place. That some powerful creature, being, some not creature, but some powerful, all-powerful being is behind it all. And the alternative is this closed system where we kind of go like these ancient people did, tottering our way through life, trying to get a little edge on things, looking for a sign, right? Looking for a sign. Why, if I go out, and there's a pebble on the driveway, and it's on the left side, that means I should take the left side of the driveway when I go to work today. But if the pebble's on the right side, then I should really turn right, or something terrible is going to happen to me because somebody must have put that pebble there. The universe did. Come on. Paul's saying there's a better path. Now, he's writing to these Galatians, these young Christians. And the problem for these young Christians was they had lived in that kind of a superstitious world of trying to figure the universe out by keeping the gods happy. And they had only recently been set free to follow Jesus. And so here he's kind of digging into this issue with them, and he reminds them of the past. And he says in Galatians 4:8, formerly, when you did not know God, the Creator, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those who by nature are not gods. You know the most effective form of slavery? When you don't even realize you're a slave. When you don't even realize how blind and how locked down you are. When you think that somebody giving you a bogus phone number is actually a secret message from the universe so you can go buy a lottery ticket. And you never even do the math that after you bought the ticket, you were X number of dollars behind, and you were still looking for something clever, like a license plate, or perhaps the code on some product that you bought. Oh, that must be the number that changes the universe. That's slavery. I wonder how many ways we're enslaved, and we don't even know it. I mean, I know it's possible to build a closed system out of something as beautiful as the Christian faith. If we reduce ourselves to the point of saying, well, the reason I'm a Christian, just to make sure I cover all my bases. Because I don't want the big guy upstairs to be upset with me. So if I get to church, I give a little money, if I do this, if I do that, I've sort of covered that part of things. That means that we're just plugging God into our little technology. And that's a trap. That's a trap when God came into our world and into our lives to take us to a totally different place. Paul says in verse 9 to these poor people, but now that you know God, or rather are known by God, how is it that you're turning back to those weak and miserable forces? Do you wish to be enslaved by them all over again? Paul says, you now know the God who made everything. Or to put it a better way, he knows you. And that doesn't just mean that he knows you exist. Of course he knows we exist. It means he has chosen a personal relationship with us. You know, we all know about a lot of people, right? I remember when I met Suzanne, and I wanted to know her more than anybody on the planet. And as soon as we started to kind of get to know each other, my biggest question wasn't whether I could know her. What was my biggest concern? Would she want to know me? I remember when I told my dad, I think she's the one. And my dad looked over at me and says, you do? Do you think she'd want you? I'm like, gee, Dad, thanks for the support. So I said, yeah, I think she does. He shook his head, but I won. It wasn't just that I knew her. It's that she knows me. That's what makes it work. God, Paul says, you now know God. You don't have to know the stars. You don't have to know the moon and the sun. You don't have to go fishing around for funny numbers to try to win lotteries. You know the Creator, the one who made the whole show. And more importantly, he knows you, your family. So he says, why would you go back to the old way? Why would you exchange your exodus into God's freedom for an exile back into that same old kind of dark way of living. He says they were tempted to go back to those weak and miserable forces. Now, there's a little bit of technical stuff going on there. That phrase, weak and miserable forces, was referring, among other things, to the planets. Those planets that had the names and still have the names of Roman gods, Mercury and Venus, Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and so on. Those were considered gods to the pagans. And he says, you want to go back under that control? You want to have to go check your horoscope out with some fake religious counselor, some priest in some temple? Do you want to have to go and have them take a chicken and sacrifice it and cut it open and see whether there's some secret message written on its internal organs so you can decide whether you buy a house or take a trip? Really? You want to go back to that when you know the God who made the whole show? Paul specifically points out a way that they were tempted to be enslaved. And I tie this into this time issue because it was all about time. The real powerful thing in their lives wasn't cutting open chickens or whatever, but it had to do with getting time right. Galatians 4:10-11, he says, you aren't observing special days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that somehow I've wasted my efforts on you. Of course, what they had done is they had gone back into a kind of adoption of certain aspects of the Jewish faith from which the Christian faith was emerging. And they were thinking, well, to make sure that God is happy with me and make sure I get this all right, I got to make sure that I get all the holidays right. I got to make sure I do all the festivals and get all the days right. If my calendar is right, then I'm right. If I have the timing right, then that makes me a good person. Closed system. Instead of a relationship with God in which we celebrate Him with the holidays and the special days, they were locking it down to making sure they had all the mechanics right, and then they would be right. Paul says that's just a form of slavery. In fact, if you think about it, that is precisely the temptation that Satan presented to Adam and Eve. You don't need a relationship with this Creator. He's trying to rob you. Go experience His world. He said you shouldn't eat that tree. Well, it's part of the planet. It's part of your world. Go for it. Figure it out for yourself. You become your own masters of right and wrong by experiencing the world. Paul's saying, look, you guys, you've just met the Creator. He loves you. He's made you His children. Now you're thinking that the only way to go forward is to get your calendar in order? Some sort of religious observance is the bottom line, and God will somehow go, okay, they must be okay. If you study church history, you'll find that Christians had pitched battles over which day Easter was supposed to be, or which day Christmas is supposed to be. To this day, if you know anything about Christian history, you know that some of us celebrate Christmas on December 25th and others on January 6th. You familiar with that? Orthodox Church. Well, it's just kind of an oddity now. It wasn't an oddity when they were fighting over it. Do you think God really cared? I'll let you know a little secret. Nobody knows what day Jesus was born. Could have been your birthday. Nobody has any idea. And yet the church ended up fighting over which day was the right day, completely going right down the same slavery path that Paul is talking about here. How easy it is for us to think our systems hold the secret to us being okay with God. But it's a path of exile, not exodus. It's the same dark path away from the Creator. Whenever we put our trust in the creation or our ability to figure it out instead of the Creator, we start another exile journey. So how do you convince a person to abandon that exile journey, however seductive it may be, and get on God's journey? Well, I love what Paul does here. It seems like he kind of goes off his argument, and he does, but he does it for a reason. Because Paul understood that if you're going to change somebody's heart, you're never going to argue them into a new position. How many of you ever had an argument with somebody over religion? When I was a kid, that was the thing to do. We'd go to a college campus and we'd sit there and argue with somebody. Well, there'd always be somebody that wanted to talk all night, like me, and we'd talk till it was time to get in the car and go home. We never really convinced anybody that they should change, because a relationship with God isn't just about winning an argument. It's not about having all the right answers. So when Paul looks at these Christians that are going back into this slavery, he takes a totally different tack. He says to them, verse 12, I plead with you, brothers and sisters, become like me, for I became like you. You did me no wrong. He said, look, this isn't about figuring out the calendar. We're a new family. We have a relationship together based on what God did for us. He goes on in this passage to talk about how when he was very ill, he had some sort of eye ailment. He said, you weren't turned off by my disease. You would have taken your own eyes out of your own heads and put them in my head for me if you could have done it. You'd have given away your eyes. He said, let's remember who we are as part of God's family. And then he says in verse 19 and 20, my dear children, for whom I am again in the pains of childbirth till Christ is formed in you. How I wish I could be with you now and change my tone, because I'm perplexed about you. And here he's talking not about winning an argument, but about the birthing of a new person. He's talking about this identity issue, about who we are, because your identity allows you to make your mark in this world. Paul says, I'm just groaning all over again for your rightful identity to come to pass. Just this past Friday, my brother's son and daughter-in-law basically had two little babies brought into the world. They had two children, and Molly, my nephew's wife, was pregnant with twins. We were all talking all week about how she had 2 weeks to go, et cetera, et cetera. The C-section had already been put on the calendar because of the position of one of the babies. And then we got this email. Molly's on her way to the hospital. She had some complications, and so this was a preventative measure. The babies will be born today. So I turned to my wife, it was the 14th being her birthday, and said, well, you'll be sharing your birthday for the rest of time with this family, because now 2 little boys are born on her birthday. And so very gratefully, God was wonderful to our family. By 7:30, the 2 babies were born, and James and Luke. And from all that I've heard, Mom is doing fine. We all know what that's like, whether it's been in our own lives or in the lives of family and friends. That anticipation of that childbirth, of these new people coming into the world. What will they really look like, and how will they act, and how will our family change? And you think about Mom going for those 9 months and Dad kind of walking alongside of her and thinking and just going through that process. And then you take your class and you learn how to handle the contractions and so on. And you have this, both emotionally and physically, this amazing effort to bring forth a new person, or in this case, 2 new people into the world. They don't always tell you at the childbirthing class that this is not the first time you will give birth to these children. Because a couple of years down the line, a little person begins to emerge. And then all of a sudden you find that you are doing things like moral instruction. And you're seeing some things that might need some correction. And you're starting to hope that maybe this child can have a particular future. Not that you want to tell them what they're going to be, but you're seeing certain things. And what happens? We groan in childbirth all over again. This time it's not a physical groaning. Well, it may be physical. It's not a physical experience. But it's all of a sudden, Mom and Dad are looking at what's going on in the child's life. There may be something that needs some medical treatment, or there may be that you look at this child, you realize, wow, this kid really needs us to invest in such and such a thing right now because of these capabilities. I had a granddaughter in the VYO strings camp. And so just before we went on vacation, we went down to Burlington, and there were 12 little kids all playing Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee on their violins. What's going on? Well, Mom, my daughter, is groaning in childbirth again to make that happen, so that this child could grow in a new way. And we tell ourselves as we're going through that, when they turn 18, we're done. How many of you have a child over 18? Are you done? You do it all over. You're grown in childbirth. Now the decisions are big decisions. And it's not just about what you're going to major in college. It's going to be about who is a life partner and what kind of choices are being made. And is this kid going down a good path or a bad path? And when things get hard, you don't just groan in childbirth for a few hours, but you groan in childbirth maybe for days, weeks, and months, even years. Okay, so now your child has gotten it all settled in, got the good relationship, and maybe a nice little family coming along, and now you discover you're going to be a grandparent, and guess what you start doing all over again? You groan in childbirth. My brother now knows what it's like to be a grandfather of twins. We were blessed with that experience 19 years ago. And honestly, nobody in the family had a clue, which is okay, what it was like to be a grandparent of twins. Now, my brother sends an email, lots of tears of joy. I think there you are. Your path will be a little different than mine, but it's going to be double childbirth for you and the whole family. Because we're never done birthing that new identity, whether it be in the life of a child or maybe with a friend, even as spouses, we grow each other. And Paul looks at these Christians and he goes, I don't want you to lose what God has been doing. I'm groaning in childbirth all over for you again. That's how God changes us. It's through his truth and our relationships with each other. And so when Paul sees his people going down the wrong path, he doesn't just yell at them, and he doesn't just try to talk them out of what's going on. He tries to walk alongside them so he can grow them to a whole new place. We face these same challenges, you and I. We aren't going to go out on a starry night and try to figure out, how the next business venture is supposed to go or what the kids are supposed to wear to school on the first day of school based upon which planet is in what house or whatever. We're not going to do that. But we have our own temptations to kind of build a system and then plug God into it. And sometimes I think for those of us who choose a path of faith and of going to church, it can be very tempting to think, well, if I cover the bases, I can build this box for my life and plug God into it, and then God will very dutifully make everything work. Sort of like putting a battery in a clock. Doesn't work very well without a battery. So we put the battery in and tick, 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 the clock works. Paul's saying it doesn't work like that. God's not something you plug into your life. He is your life. I quoted to you Psalm 19, which told us that the world around us talks about God all the time, but not with words. It points us to him. That the most beautiful thing about Psalm 19 is that David writes an even longer second part to it, in which he says, human beings can know and experience the God that the stars can only point to. Listen to what David says. This is verses 7 to 14. The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. See, that came right from God. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. Here, when you know God and are known by him and he's speaking into your life, he's refreshing your soul, he's making wise the simple. We all need that. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The decrees of the Lord are firm, and all of them are righteous. Now he talks about his personal interaction with God. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They're sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them your servant is warned. In keeping them there's great reward. But who can discern their own errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant also from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then I will be blameless, innocent of great transgression. May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. This is a song that starts with standing under the night sky and seeing how big God must be. But it's a song that ends on such a personal note. At the very end, David is talking to God. And he says, Lord, let my words and my meditations be pleasing in your sight. Isn't that what a relationship is all about? I know when I'm talking to my wife, I think before I say something, how will this go down? Is this going to make us better, or is this going to make us worser? Because I don't want to go down the worst path. I want to go down the better path. And, sometimes all of us, we'll let something fly, and then it's like, whew, shouldn't have said that. Because it's not about winning the argument in a marriage. All right, guys, ladies? It's really about being together. Each one of us is going to be right some of the time, wrong some of the time. So if we're keeping score, that's kind of a useless proposition. David had come to understand the most important thing was to know God and be known by him. And then that new person that David was becoming would be a person who was guided not by the stars, not by the lottery numbers, not even by religion, but by the God who made him. That's an Exodus journey. That's the journey God called you and me to take. It's the harder journey. You can't figure it out. You can't create a technology for it. There's no app you can put on your phone that you just get on there and, enter a life situation, bing, 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 here's your answer. No, this is when you work out the way you really work out the business of living, step by step with God. This is how we find our true ID. Let's bow our heads together and ask if the team would come up. And I'm going to encourage you, and just for these next couple of minutes, while they sing this first song, and actually a couple of songs, you just bow your head with me for a second before we stand. I'm going to ask you just to think about your own life right now. What do you need most? What do you feel the need for the most? What is it that you would say is the thing that you're on the biggest quest for right now? Maybe about parenting those kids, school, a new year, and so on. Maybe a financial thing of not sure how this is all going to fit together. Maybe caring for someone older than yourself, a parent or a loved one. Maybe about needing a job or finding a job or having one and wondering how to move forward in that career. Maybe you're looking at yourself and saying, I need changes inside of me. I'm not happy with who I am. And maybe a relationship where you just feel like giving up and just saying, well, this just isn't working. But there's a little voice inside of you saying, it could be, God could do something different. The real challenge of our lesson today is to say, would you dare to take the harder path? Looking past everything you can figure out in your own strength. And taking the time to talk to your Creator, to the God who loves you. It's the most arrogant, crazy thing in the world, isn't it? For little old human beings of only decades in age to say, I talked to the Creator of the universe today. And it would be a preposterous thing because we could never know Him. The God who made the however many 100 billion galaxies. But He took the step to come in human form so that we could know Him. He came speaking a language we could understand and living a life that we could see even in the stories that have come to us. He came and brought His Spirit to live inside of us. So knowing the God who created us is knowing Jesus, His Son. Would you be willing to take that place in your life where you need you need that help right now? And say, Lord, I believe that you're going to talk to me first and foremost. You're going to show me, out of your love for me, the way forward. Let the world point me to you, and know that in the end, all that really matters is you. What does the psalmist say? My soul finds rest in God alone. David had figured that out, and you can too. Father, I pray that you would help us to take that deep breath and look past the world around us to the Lord Jesus, who is the Word made flesh, dwelled among us, is here in His Spirit. Help us, Lord, I pray. I pray your wisdom to come to people, and your strength and your courage to come to people who need to hear from you right now in very real, practical ways. Pray you show them a path of provision and a path of forgiveness and a path of healing and a path of refreshing and joy, path of light. We give you the thanks in Jesus' name. Let's stand together.